welcome to the September, today is the 8th, Frank Talks. Franklin Tomorrow Frank Talks, and we are so glad you're here. We know we pride ourselves on starting on time, so I'm going to start on time, even though this is actually not on time for Frank Talks. This is normally when we gather for coffee, but this morning we want to be mindful that this is an active site, and they open at 10 a.m., and we are so appreciative of being able to be here this morning here at Carnton. How many of you have visited Carnton in the past? Great numbers. Good, good, good. So I'm Mindy Tate, CEO of Franklin Tomorrow, and we're here today to talk about the 20th anniversary of Robert Hicks, The Widow of the South. How many of you have read Widow of the South? Okay, good numbers. If you haven't read it, it's for sale in the bookshop, in the gift shop. And we would encourage you to support the Battle of Franklin Trust for their gracious hospitality today by looking through the gift shop, but also maybe go on a tour today. And I'm going to ask Eric in a little bit after we talk about some things to tell you about about exactly all the properties Battle of Franklin Trust manages and why that's important and how that's growing and changing. But I wanted just to start by welcoming you again. I'm Mindy Tate, CEO of Franklin Tomorrow. Frank Talks, we present this monthly at various locations across the community. This is a great honor. This is a great honor for you to be sitting on this porch this morning. Thank you to the Battle of Franklin Trust, Eric Jacobson, Lori McPeak, Joanna, all the folks, Billy, the operations director, who helped set this up this morning. It's an honor to be here because a lot of times we don't get this opportunity, and so it's a great thing to be here. So thank you. Let's give them a round of applause, Battle of Franklin Trust. As I mentioned, Frank Talks is a monthly program, and normally we'd start by showing you a bunch of videos, some of them funny, some of them not, or in a way of thanking our partners, our sponsors who help us present this. Our presenting sponsor for Frank Talks is Renaissance Bank, and let me have the Renaissance folks wave. Thank you for your support. These are so important in that we provide the opportunity for people to learn more about their community, and so we appreciate the support of Renaissance Bank. We also couldn't do our programming annually without the support of our sustaining partners, and they are here. Some of them are here this morning. Those include Williamson Health. Greg Broy is here from Williamson Health, and they've got an event on Wednesday that he will give you a little flyer about maybe later. Also, we have a big thank you to Atmos Energy. We appreciate their support. They're very involved in our community. And then additionally, we appreciate the support that we receive from Reagan Smith / Pape Dawson. So they are our sustaining partners and help Franklin Tomorrow keep most of our events free. So all of our Frank Talks are free. We also present a quarterly breakfast with the mayors that is free. And that next one will be October 21st. And this is a change. We will be at Liberty Hall at the factory for Breakfast with the Mayors on October 21st. So we want you to mark your calendars for that. So we don't want to waste any time here. We want to talk about, this is really not as much an opportunity to talk about Robert Hicks as much as it is to talk about the impact that Robert Hicks, his writing, his books, his community work, his battlefield preservation work came and left on our community. He's now been gone for just over 2 years, and we miss him. His friends, we miss him, but his impact continues, and so we're excited to have a program today that will include Maureen Thornton with Visit Franklin, Eric Jacobson, who's the CEO of Battle of Franklin Trust, Tim Kearns, who is the board chair for Battle of Franklin Trust, and Julian Bibb, who was the co-founder with several others, including Robert, of an organization called Franklin's Charge that's had a huge impact in battlefield preservation. But I'm going to start by asking Maureen to come up just to talk about, and we've had some of this before, but there are some new numbers on the impact of tourism in our community, as well as to talk about the impact of heritage tourism in the Williamson County community. So Maureen?
Good morning. As Mindy mentioned, I'm Maureen Thornton, President and CEO of Visit Franklin, the countywide tourism organization. And Mindy's exactly right, and I'm probably going to speak the shortest because I, unfortunately, am one of the folks today who did not get a chance to spend much time with Robert Hicks. I am a relative newcomer to the community. I've just hit 4 years, moved here in July of 2021 to take on the role and embrace this beautiful place that we all get to live in. But the impact of heritage tourism and battlefield tourism and Civil War tourism is incredibly important on our community. And when this book came out 20 years ago, I have heard stories about people showing up at the house with the book under their arm and wanting to see where this story and these things happened. And ever since then, particularly the work of the Battle of Franklin Trust in telling a real story of what happened in the book. The book is, of course, a fantastic historical fiction with really interesting characters and a sort of interesting narrative. But people come because they have heard that story and they want to know more. And when they get here, people are never disappointed about the opportunity to learn about what really happened here. And I think that's the beautiful work that that so many folks have contributed to, that Eric has led so fantastically, about coming to places like Carnton, also Carter House, also Ripavilla down in Spring Hill, and hearing about the progression of the story of the things that happened and also the impact that they have had. And I think from a tourism standpoint, it's really not just about seeing this beautiful place, because it is beautiful, but also hearing the story and what that story has meant and the things that happened following that have really shaped the way we live today, and things that we're still sort of grappling with and working through and trying to understand. And from a tourism standpoint, people want to hear a story that means something. They want to learn something. They want to leave somewhere with an impact and a change. And that's what I think is so magical about the experience here. Not that the story is nice or pretty or easy, but that it really happened and that we can understand some of the things that have happened since. And so we have a focus on ways that people can come and learn from this. You can get tickets to this from our visitor center in downtown Franklin. We're also opening a second visitor center, soft opening this month, over at the factory, where people will not only be able to get tickets to this site and to Carter House and to Ripavilla, but also have an opportunity to hear and learn about other ways to explore the community and hear other stories that are from a historic standpoint, a cultural, and all of the other ways that you can explore our community. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to partner with folks like Mindy, who put on this event and allow us to share about the reasons that people come and visit. She mentioned some new economic impact numbers. We actually just got those earlier this month. One of the things we love sharing is the fact that visitors, when they come, they spend their money in our community and then they go home. And in 2024, those visitors spent over $1.3 billion directly here. A lot of that goes into small businesses. That generates tax revenue that then goes to our governments, that also saves money that we as residents would otherwise have to pay in to have the services that we enjoy from our city and county and state services. And that number for 2024 was just over $1,600 per household saved by the tax revenue generated by visitors into our community. And so we appreciate the opportunity to partner with you as residents who are part of our ability to welcome visitors, folks like the Battle of Franklin Trust, people like Franklin's Charge, who have done great preservation work that give visitors a place to go and see and experience the story, and then of course partners like Franklin Tomorrow. So without further ado, I'll probably invite Mindy or Eric back. Eric Jacobson, wherever you are. And I'll say, as he's walking up, I've told so many people, it does not matter how many times I've heard Eric Jacobson talk. I always learn something new, and it is always fascinating. And so, no pressure, but come and wow us.
Mindy is beckoning Tim and Julian to the front. Do you want me to hand it over to one? Oh, just all three of us? Well, yeah. Mindy's going to do a proper intro now.
A proper intro. Who's gonna sit in the rocking chair? Julian, are you gonna sit in the rocking chair, or Eric sit in the rocking chair? Someone should sit in the rocking chair, because I think the rocking chairs on the porch are part of stories of the founding of Franklin's Charge and the ideas of sitting on this porch and discussing it. So, battlefield preservation in Franklin, I'll just say it, became a priority or changed over time. And as a community, I'm not even going to try to say this because Eric says it so much better. So Eric Jacobson has been the CEO of Battle of Franklin Trust now, came in the 90s, late 90s? You.
Oh, no, 20 years.
20 years. See, he's 20 years ago, too. Wow, there's a lot that happened 20 years ago, it seems like. I'm thinking. But Eric Jacobson is the CEO of Battle of Franklin Trust, and he's also an author, finishing up his latest book, which is nonfiction. Eric once told me that he didn't read historical fiction, but he did read Widow of the South, and so that's at least something else to talk about. But yeah, I'll turn it over to Eric Jacobson.
Proper intro wasn't the right terminology. We clearly we didn't rehearse any of this. Julian, I'll hand the microphone over to Tim or Julian. We'll flip a coin, and Julian can tell you some really great stories about Robert and Widow of the South. I'm going to take a slightly different approach, because I was thinking on the way up this morning, what could I say that everyone who is here doesn't already know about Robert or about Widow of the South, or really about its impact. On a baseline level, as someone who worked here, started working here just a few months after it came out, you know, some things that really take off and hit like the stratosphere have a lag time. And it was a few months before it just exploded. And I remember what it was like in 2006 and 2007 and 2008 especially, and how many people were visiting solely because they had either heard about the book or read about the book. Didn't know Robert. They felt compelled to come here. So here's the story, because my old friend Joe Smith is in attendance today, and I think in this crowd, Joe and I were the only people who were at the meeting that I'm going to tell you about. And it was a meeting that was held at Green's Grocery in the summer of 2008. Is anyone else here who was at that meeting that I missed, that you're hiding somewhere? No, I think it was just Joe and I. No, Rick wasn't there. And it was a very interesting meeting, because several of the people who were at that meeting are now gone. Robert, Tom Murdoch, others are gone for different reasons, or no longer involved. But if you wanted to know the real impact that Robert Hicks and Widow of the South had on historic preservation and tourism, I could encapsulate it in that story. And it was the meeting where Robert Hicks suggested that the Battle of Franklin Trust should be created. And the moment that he said those words, you could see the faces of several people at the meeting as if they'd eaten something terrible. And then they had to have a second helping, because there were people in that room that did not want to hear what he had to say. And if you knew Robert, that was actually when he was at its best. Because he would himself say that he would just keep talking. And he just kept talking. And he kept talking about the idea that these two sites, Carnton and Carter House, should be under one banner. Well, I was already a convert, because years before, even before Widow of the South was published, I had received a letter when I lived in Arizona about saving what we now call the Eastern Flank Battlefield Park. And this is where Rod and Kay Heller enter the equation, at least in my life, because I didn't know who they were. But I knew that something was happening in Franklin that I wanted to be part of, and I ended up moving here. And then I got to meet all of these people who were transforming an entire community's understanding about the past. Not about a place, not about a person, not about just an event, but a collective understanding that what had happened in the past had almost been forgotten. And during that meeting, as Robert talked about the idea of creating an organization that had never existed, and months later at one of these rather contentious meetings, someone actually stood up and said, if this had been made a national park 100 years ago, if Franklin was a national battlefield park, would anyone ever argue about tearing it apart? Well, we're just trying to put it back together. That's what we're doing. And Robert, I think, instinctively understood that Carnton, as a sole entity, just like Carter House, was just that. But that if you could put it together, you could build something. And all these years later, this organization, along with Franklin's Charge, I think has transformed everyone's understanding of the Battle of Franklin, the Battle of Spring Hill, those important components of this terrible 4-year war that redefined the country, and how people dealt with its memory and its cost. And that drills back down to the whole point of Widow of the South. I've had so many people ask me, and I have on more than one occasion had to redirect my own staff when someone asks about, well, how much of the book is real? Well, you can't quantify that. You can't say it's 10 or 15 or 18.5% or 30. You can't do that. That's not the point. The point is the core of the story is accurate. That what happened here that day was important to remember, that what the people that lived here did for decades was as important. Because what they were doing was remembering. And they were dealing with this for the rest of their lives like a lot of other people did. And I don't know what other legacy one could leave behind than what you see today. And I don't know whether Robert's with us right now or not, but he is and always will be a part of not just this place, but of what has happened. And that so many people, the visitors that you will see as we end the meeting, who've never been to Franklin, all they'll see is legacy. Even if they never quite know what that is, they will see the hard work of many people, but especially Robert Hicks. Thanks.
Okay, so in case you didn't know, Battle of Franklin Trust is a nonprofit organization that works in historic preservation, not just here, but on other properties in Williamson County and just over the line, that are all tied together somewhat under partially under one story, one campaign, one battle, but each have their own story to tell. Tim Kearns has been involved for a number of years, and he now serves as the chairman of the board of trust of the Battle of Franklin Trust. And Tim, how has this organization grown, and the impact of the book? And you do remember the fun summer concerts we used to have here. I know I had to be carried out on a stretcher once when I broke my ankle, but oh well, that's a whole nother story. Tim, tell us a little bit about your work and what your impact, what you believe the impact of Widow of the South was.
Thank you. And you can bet Robert is listening right now over there. Especially, we've got the microphone going. He can hear us, and he's listening to every word. Yep. So my introduction to Franklin was 30 years ago. I actually bought a house in Polk Place, who shares a property line with this property. And I came into town because we acquired a nursery. If you haven't been around for a long time, it was called Flower Power. McGinnis Farms, Site 1. It's at the corner of MacHatcher and Hillsboro. So I was in my office one day at the nursery, and they said, somebody's here to see you, and Robert Hicks, the force to be reckoned with, showed up in my office. He said, we've got a historic venue in Franklin, and we're trying to bring the garden back to what it would have looked like mid-19th century. And you're in the nursery business, and so we'd love to get your help. And you really can't say no to that guy. So I dealt with Robert from that point in trying to bring back the garden. Obviously, we have Tennessee summers, so it needed a little irrigation. We needed some plants procured that were specific. I think Justin Stelter has done an amazing job, and he's here today. He's done an amazing job with the continuation of the garden. But back in '95, when we first got started, it did not look anywhere near like what it looks like today. And you can appreciate after this, if you want to take a stroll through the garden and see the beautiful work that has been done in the 30 years since we started with irrigation and just kind of placing plants. One of the interesting stories that Robert told me, and I'm not going to remember all the names, but they aren't necessarily part of the story, is he hired an architect to come in and kind of help us put back the garden, the layout as it would have been in the day when the McGavics were here. And they walked the garden, and it doesn't look like it does today. There was nothing there really. And the gentleman that was here, the architect, went back on the morning before he was going to catch his flight and went on the second story porch, and it was a frost that morning. And the areas where the paths once were caught the frost in a different pattern than the dirt caught the frost. And so at that point in time, he said, I know how it was laid out. And using that as a template, we were able to replicate fairly close to what we thought would have existed then. The fence, there's a lot of things in the garden. We have a fence that is a pretty fence, the lattice work, and then there is a board fence. And there was some contentious times as we served on the board back in the day that there were people that did not like that board fence. Now, the board fence would have been practical back in the day because it protected from the north wind. And so when you were feeding the family and the slaves out of that garden, you depended on all the growth that you could get. And so based on the way that this is actually laid today, they could get vegetables, they could get another month of growing season, as opposed to if it was just a wide open garden. Interesting, and I've learned all of this from Robert. So he was passionate about everything. Inside, if you want to take time to take a tour after this, some of the wallpapers, the floor coverings, the furnishings, all of that was based on the force of nature that Robert was. He wanted everything to be as accurate to the time period as possible for this whole place. But the Widow of the South came out about the time that the economy made a downturn. And we really needed tourism, and tourism at that time was really suffering. And so at that, we had a trailer underneath that crepe myrtle on the opposite side of where the boxwoods are. There was a single wide trailer. That trailer served as our office, gift shop, bathrooms, everything. It was nasty, especially during concert days. We would have a concert and we would set the stage down by the slave house, and there were thousands, definitely hundreds, up to 1,000 people here on those days, all sharing that bathroom. in that single wide trailer, and it was a bad situation. So we needed tourism to increase. The revenue at that time was suffering as well. And so today, where we have the luxury of actually having a stimulated economy, growth in the local market where attendance has been growing every year, one of the things that the board did at the time in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, was we did the work. And so we've been here with the board pressure washing this roof and cleaning all the railings and taking care of that. It was a blue collar board. And we really worked hard. Fortunately, we don't have to do that today. We have the revenue and the funds to do it, but this place and all of the places really started as a hands-on, grassroots type of effort. And Robert was there kind of pointing the way that he wanted things done. A guy that was just like him was Ernie Bacon. And one of Ernie's projects was he wanted to put the front, this is the back of the house, the front drive, the way that it would have been at the same time period. So there was a cedar line drive based on history with a chert road. And so I'm the blue collar guy on the board. And so that was my project. And honestly, I don't remember the year, but my daughter was in 3rd grade because she came out here with me and helped lay out the spots that all the trees would be planted. And then we found somebody to dig the holes. Could have been Justin. And then we had all the cedars donated. And then we made some deals with the street department where they could take the shredded leaves in the fall and compost them in the corner of the field in exchange for providing a chert road for us. So they had to haul that chert out of Columbia where it's native. And so now we have a beautiful front road. And it's guys like Robert, guys like Ernie Bacon, guys like, there's so many people that came before us that have worked hard to really get these sites the way they are and to help us be what we are today. And we really can't say enough for the effort that they've put forward. And they were forces to be reckoned with. And we need more of those forces carrying this forth into the future. Thanks. I just didn't want to follow Julian.
No one wants to follow Julian, actually, ever when Julian speaks. And I am going to have Eric, after Julian speaks, just help us understand a little bit about this place and its importance. But Julian, when did you first meet Robert Hicks, and when did he tell you he was going to write this book, and what was your impression of that? I'll start off by asking that.
Well, that's great, Mindy. What a beautiful morning to be out here and celebrating Robert. I can really almost see him looking back toward the cemetery right now. I met Robert much later than most people would think. Robert and I both moved to Franklin, Tennessee in 1974, but we didn't know each other except by reputation. I moved here with Jane, who's sitting in the back, to teach high school, 11th grade English at Battleground Academy. And Jane fell in love with Franklin, Tennessee. And after I taught English, I went to Vanderbilt Law School and graduated and began thinking about, as graduation was approaching, where do I want to live? And Franklin, Tennessee was not on the radar. We were living here. It was a town of about 7,000 people. And I learned a very valuable lesson that all husbands should know. It took me a while to learn this lesson, but the lesson was to finally say to Jane, where do you want to live? After she had rejected a couple of my thoughts about where we should be moving. And Jane said, I want to live in Franklin. she had fallen in love with this town of 7,000 people. And so we did. And it was the greatest decision I made, following her advice, which was right. And as time passed, I got involved in historic preservation through the Heritage Foundation and other groups. And I was hearing about Robert Hicks, but we had not really met until 2003. And in 2003, one of the things I love is Robert had started writing the book, Widow of the South. He had ideas. He was working out the concept of how the book would play out. And at the same time that was going on, the Eastern Flank Battlefield, which was a golf course, came into view. It was going to be sold by the owner. And Robert had this dream, an incredible dream, of buying the golf course, creating a battlefield park, and starting a historic preservation movement in Franklin, Tennessee that would reclaim the lost battlefield. Because Robert knew that not only do places matter, but he also knew that places are key to telling history, to telling the story, that you can walk on the ground, feel the ground, think about armies moving across the ground, and then that leads you to thinking about, why are armies moving across the ground? What was the Civil War? Why did we fight it? What happened after it was over? How does it affect us today? All of those issues were on full display in Robert's vision of what battlefield reclamation would be. And in 2003, a group of people, I love being at this space because we used the back porch of Carnton as a gathering spot. But in 2003, a group of what I call the originals, I wasn't in that group, met out here and thought about Robert's idea to buy the golf course that adjoins us. And that group decided, yes, that's a great idea. How are we going to ever do that? The sale price was $5 million. And that seemed astronomical in 2003, especially to a group that didn't have a nickel. As the story progressed, Robert led efforts to talk to Kay and Rod Heller, who stepped up, and they're here, who stepped up to preserve this great property and to give the battlefield groups an opportunity to come together to raise funds. And as you all know, what happened over the course of that period of time is that the battlefield groups, at that point, Franklin's Charge, got together with the city of Franklin, and the city of Franklin made a matching grant proposal. And the matching grant proposal was, we'll put up $1 for every dollar you all fundraise, and up to $2.5 million each. And if we get that, then we will proceed to pay for the golf course property and purchase it from Rod and Kay Heller, who were so magnanimously and generously holding it for this effort. And so thank you, Kay and Rod. And that's what happened. And Robert was leading this vision. He had the greater story in mind. At this point, I've now met him and I've gotten engaged. I met him in an interesting time at my law firm when Warner Bass and Ernie Bacon brought the Robert Hicks proposal over, and Robert and I teamed up and became great partners. It's a partnership that I'm so proud of. I miss him every day. His leadership and his vision was so central to what we were doing back then. I can remember Harry Chapman described us as the odd couple, and we definitely were. Robert was the visionary, sometimes filled with crazy and impossible notions, and I was the guy who was to make those things come about or to dissuade Robert of what we were going to do. So sometimes it was one or the other. But off we went. The first fundraising event that we had, and again, Widow of the South is is getting closer and closer. But the first fundraising event we had was right here. It was right where Mindy was talking about, in those grounds where Amy Grant and Vince Gill gave a concert, and it was a highly successful fundraising initiative. Robert and I were just tickled to death as we stood up on stage with them holding umbrellas, because those of you that were there that day, it was raining. But it opened the door. Another thing that opened the door was that in 2005, as Widow of the South is getting ready to be published, the National Geographic came to Franklin. And this was all Robert, just unbelievable. The National Geographic, if you go back and look in your April 2005 National Geographics, you'll see they were doing a story on lost battlefields and threats to existing battlefields. And so you had the threats to Gettysburg of a casino, and you had the threats of other things taking place at Antietam and Chancellorsville. And then you had this thing about Franklin, Tennessee. And the National Geographic sent a photographer here to take a picture of the Pizza Hut. And the story was going to be Franklin lost its soul, gave up its battlefield story, and all they've got left is a Pizza Hut that sits on the battlefield. Robert got wind that this was about to happen, and he contacted the National Geographic, and he and I at Choices, that'll be a quiz for people that can remember what Choices is, we had lunch with the photographer and explained that you're missing the idea. What is happening in Franklin is a total revolution in battlefield reclamation. It will be unlike anything that the nation has seen. And you can hear Robert saying that, right? Still, the only thing there was the Pizza Hut, and Carton and Carter House were preserved. But Robert was selling that vision to the photographer. The photographer goes back to Washington, tells the National Geographic, and the writer of that article, Adam Goodhart, they say we're missing something, that there's a bigger story here in Franklin. And Adam calls, and today Adam, in my mind, is one of the biggest heroes in the Franklin preservation, battlefield preservation movement. Adam comes down and he said, I'm going to meet with you all for about half a day. I've already got my story written, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to change my mind. Well, anybody that knows Robert Hicks knows what that meant. And so off we went to change Adam's mind. He wanted to know 3 people who hated us and 3 people who thought we were the greatest Franklinites there. And so we gave him views of people who didn't like the idea of battlefield reclamation or who loved it. And that night, Adam called Robert and said, I'm still here. I'm spending the night. I get it. Y'all are on to something. And it was absolutely amazing. If you go back and look at that article, the Franklin battlefield story gets more print than any of the other battlefields. And Adam captures what's about to happen in battlefield reclamation. All that is vintage Robert. Robert caught the threat. He sought out the person that was going to tell the story, and he convinced that person of what the true story really was. And it was amazing. It was amazing for me to watch Robert Hicks in full action and to see the benefit of that. I can remember we went to Washington. Again, Kay and Rod were with us, and there was a big celebration. It was the night they were opening launching the April 2005 National Geographic. So the National Geographic had a party in one of the congressional buildings, and on display was the story about Franklin, and of all the people there from every battlefield that had any national significance, the only group that got to stand up and talk about the battlefield was the city of Franklin. It was just an amazing event. That comes out, and not too many months later, here comes Widow of the South. And what happens? It's unbelievable what happens. Robert and I had started bragging to the city that Carton and the Carter House boasted in 2002 4,000 tourists. We thought that was great. We're in the Williamson leader back then, I guess, saying that that was an astounding number. And when you look at it today, Eric, it's unbelievable, the change. 1.3 billion in tourist revenues, that was only a vision, not anywhere close to reality back then. But when Widow of the South came out, followed on the heels of the National Geographic article, tourism began to just boom, and it stayed that way for many, many years. Robert and I traveled. Justin was with us on most of these trips, and some of those here were also. We traveled to different battlefields. We spoke at Gettysburg and Manassas about how Franklin is doing battlefield reclamation. What does that mean? What that means is you're buying up a bunch of expensive buildings and tearing them down to return the open space to its 1864 appearance. Again, all Robert Hicks' vision. It's incredible. Jim Lighthizer at the American Battlefield Trust used to say that Franklin was a miracle. But what he really said is there's no other place in America where battlefield reclamation has happened as tremendously as it has happened in Franklin, Tennessee. All of that is Robert's vision. Just recently, we reached $30 million in gifts and funds used to purchase battlefield property. I'd like to invite everybody here. On September 25th at 10 o'clock in the morning, we are going to take down what I call the Sedbury building. It sits over by the Carter House. It's a huge warehouse facility that was built on the battlefield, and it's going to be taken down. There'll be a ceremony that morning at 10 o'clock, and then the real demolition will start. It will open the view from the Carter House going south, looking all the way to the library, because as you all know, 2 weeks ago, we took down a brick office building and another white building that has had a variety of uses, from apartments to office space, and both of those are now gone. But it's going to be a remarkable scene, again, a testament to what Robert's vision was. I think about all of those crazy stories. I can remember Robert would get well out in front of our efforts. When we were trying to match the city's $2.5 million and raise a total of $5 million, the city was, because they now had made it a public fundraising event, that $2.5 million were going to be public funds, it now became something that had to be passed by BOMA. And so there was a meeting that night in which the opponents of the preservation movement were given 15 minutes to speak, and the battlefield proponents were given 15 minutes to speak, and then BOMA was going to vote, and they were going to vote on whether or not they would match the 2.5. And we had been through all kinds of shenanigans leading up to that point. And Robert and I would rehearse the use of our 15 minutes, and it was going to be Robert and me and Angela Calhoun. We were going to each have 5 minutes to convince BOMA that they needed to spend the $2.5 million and match with us. And as Robert is wont to do, he comes running up to me. Again, remember, we're the odd couple. And he says 2 minutes before the meeting starts, Julian, we're making a change. We're going to make a change. And I said, Robert, we're not making any changes. We're going with sticking on our plan. We're not making any changes. And then he said, well, you're going to want to make the change when you know this. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, Ashley Judd just showed up, and she's going to speak for our event, and she's going to replace Angela. And she did. I don't think the Board of Mayor and Aldermen paid 2 cents of attention to anything Robert and I said, but whatever Ashley Judd said that night, they paid attention, and they voted 7-1 to fund the $2.5 million with the $2.5 million that Franklin's charge had raised, and that led to the ultimate acquisition from the Hellers, who had stood by us all the way through. About 3 years of effort by Kay and Rod. Again, thank you, Kay and Rod. But Robert had that similar passion, because after this property had been acquired, and I will mention one quick thing about this this acquisition. We had made a commitment to the neighborhood that adjoined the golf course that we would not bring the tourist traffic here to the Battlefield Park through their neighborhood. That meant we had to have a roadway, which is the roadway every one of us drove up today. And so we had made a commitment to raise funds for that roadway. John Schroer was mayor at that time. And it was a remarkable community-wide effort to install that roadway that now serves this beautiful Carnton and the Battlefield Park itself. It was part of the commitment that Robert made. He had made a commitment to that neighborhood. You don't want the roadway there, and we're going to move it to accommodate your needs, and that's what we did. One other story I'll just tell about fundraising and Robert. Robert, we had started on the acquisition of all those properties on Columbia Avenue because that was obviously the next place to take Battlefield reclamation. And the first property we bought was, this would be a great test, the Holt Construction Company office. If anybody can remember where that is. It actually was right across the street from the Carter House, right next to the existing old home that sits there that's owned by the Battle of Franklin Trust right now. At any rate, we did our first and only signing of a note. We bought that property by signing a note, which we were paying over time, and we were having some trouble making note payments. Now, a lawyer in town, especially a bank lawyer, really did not like being behind on note payments. But we were getting kind of close to the edge, but Robert and Mary Pierce and others had discovered that Donnie Cameron was willing to sell the strip center. And Robert was busting to sign a contract. Now, we always signed contracts when we were broke, but usually we had some notion that we could fulfill them. And so Robert said, we've got to sign this contract. We've got to sign this contract. And I said, Robert, we're not signing a contract until we pay off the Holt Company note. Robert said, how much do we owe on it? I said, $250,000, and it's about a week from being in default. He said, now, Julian, if I bring you $250,000, will you sign the contract with Donnie the next day? I said, yes, Robert, if you bring me $250,000, I'll sign the contract the next day. That night, showing up at 918 Fair Street, knocking on my door, is Robert Higgs with a check from a generous donor in Brentwood for $250,000. It was unbelievable. And the next day, we got together with Donnie and his lawyer, Jim Oglesby, and we signed a contract to buy the strip center, which led to so much other property acquisition along Columbia Avenue, which continues to this date. Throughout all of these incredible times of the passion of reclaiming the Franklin battlefield, every bit of our effort was bolstered by the wit of the South. It had become a national story. Robert was traveling all over the nation. I can remember Jane, he traveled up to New Jersey and visited your mother's book club. He did that everywhere. And he brought more and more and more attention. And then what happened? CBS Sunday News did 3 separate stories on Robert, the widow of the South, and Franklin's battlefield reclamation. And all of that, the tide never turned back. It's always just been going forward with people wanting to know more about this story, this place, the Civil War, why it matters to us today. All of that was Robert's dream, and it is being fulfilled. Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you so much, Julian. And there are so many people here to thank for all they did to amplify the impact of the book, Widow of the South, which was the first of 3 books or fiction books that Robert wrote. Widow of the South, A Separate Country, and then The Orphan Mother. And so there were 3 books, and Robert died in February of 2022, and he is graciously buried in the McGavick Family Cemetery just across the way, thanks to the Heller family's generosity for him to be there. And if you walk up there today and read the inscription on his ledger stone, it says something like, if you want to see a monument or seek to find a monument to my work, look around you, or to his work, look around you. And it's had a great impact on our community, and we're so glad that Maureen could talk about tourism, and from that aspect, we're very appreciative. We would encourage you, if you haven't read the book or haven't read the other books, The Orphan Mother really is another story truly set in Franklin, set to the story, a different tone after the war, and so interesting to read as well. A Separate Country is the story of General John Bell Hood's life in New Orleans after the battle, after the Civil War, but also really ties to Franklin as well, and many of the same characters you would see in A Separate Country appear in that book, as well as a great story. We also are really appreciative of the work of Kay and Rod Heller, and we wouldn't be here celebrating today the work of preservation and reclamation without their great gifts and the hard work of people like were mentioned, Mary Pierce, Angela Calhoun, many others who have worked so hard on this. So we are here today celebrating what we are jokingly saying, the book. You know, Charleston refers to, or Savannah refers to the book. There is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and maybe for Franklin, The Widow of the South is the book, as we refer to it. As I said, this is the 20th anniversary of the publication of Widow of the South. Later this month, I think the last week in September, we're working with the History and Culture Center on Bridge Street, and we'll open an exhibit on the Widow of the South and Robert there that will go hopefully through the end of the year there. And so that's something to look forward to. But also, I would let you know that Robert's former publicist and who worked with him on a number of his books is launching a historical fiction contest. The Robert Hicks Award for Historical Fiction will be launched later this month, and that'll be an opportunity to continue telling history, but in a way that may be more accessible to people. So we're excited to participate in that as well. Can't ask you enough to read the books. Can't ask you enough to support Franklin's Charge. Can't ask you enough to support Battle of Franklin Trust by visiting their sites, by supporting them with membership, by being part of and learning the story. But thank you for being here today, and walk around the grounds, tour the garden, go over to the graveyard and see Robert Stone. And if you're so up for it, take a tour of the home, those tours, or look at the ticket that would give you access to Carnton, Carter House, and Rippavilla. So thank you so much. Thank you, Eric, and your team for the hospitality. Thank you, and go out and make it a great day.